Right,
when
and
you
there really isn't that research base, is there?
there's not a lot of research to go on. So reading research is good. I mean, it gives you a starting place. But I think you need to be open-minded and not also. I also noticed that most American organizations, particularly, are very biased in their thinking. They think that, for example, inclusive education programs can only work one way.
Right.
Um, and they have these sort of hot topics that they think need to be included, but in fact don't work necessarily in the country they're working. I can give you examples in Georgia. Like there's some organizations that have really pushed about parent support groups, hotlines. You know, these are all things that we would use in our country and
Right.
are really important. We're a really touchy-feely kind of culture. I can tell you right now, I have run more parent support groups in Georgia, and they just have not been very effective. Mainly because people have so many basic needs problems, and that's really not a cultural value to hang out your underwear, you know?
Right. Not in public, that's for sure.
No, so it's really not the place to start. Maybe someday, you know, you can get there, but definitely people need to be a little bit more culturally sensitive about what works, what doesn't work. I told you a little bit about confidentiality. Um, so I guess doing their homework, but also starting with small trial projects would definitely be more effective. That's how our projects have become more effective. We have made huge amount of mistakes. It took 4 or 5 projects before we finally got ours right, only because there were things we didn't anticipate
That happens to you too, Cathy?
all the time. And you don't know. And unless you're really monitoring closely, you
Yes.
might not even know that those things are a problem.
Right.
So I guess I don't know if that answered your
It
question.
it does. It does. You know, the importance of getting outside of the capitals and working with others,
Answer.
and close monitoring and evaluation.
Focus groups is another one of those hot spot hot topics. A lot of the projects I read always talk about focus groups and how important they are to develop focus groups. But again, that's a very American concept. In places like Georgia and other countries where the personalities of people are very passive and they like to be more directed, focus groups isn't a really good starting spot. It could be in other countries. I did some work in Azerbaijan, and focus groups actually, you know, had some success there. But that's, again, sort of knowing your country. But again, there's a lot of, you really need to know your country before you develop a project. We need a lot more research in what does work in specific countries, and not so much taking one project from, you know, Central Africa and planting that project, you know, somewhere in Central Asia. That just doesn't work.
Right, right. So it's going to really take a lot more listening on our side and looking closer at issues than just becoming creating programming for the sake of creating program.
Correct.
What speaking of programming, what's Mac's plans for the future? Where do you see your organization, your NGO going for the next year or so? Um, what do you have in the works, Cathy?
Well, what we are hoping to do, we will be continuing what we're doing in the villages with some of the stuff I already described. But we're also we right before I left Georgia the last time, our NGO has become in demand to do some training in some inclusive schools and centers around the country that have been recently set up. And have had a little bit of training by the ministry. Some of these requests have been initiated by Peace Corps volunteers who are brought to Georgia to teach English alongside a Georgian co-teacher and are in shock on how the school systems work. Other times, it's the schools themselves. The new inclusive schools have been given some training about the concepts of inclusive education, but not enough. For example, most of these trainings focus on what inclusive education means, but that somehow teachers walk away with the idea that inclusive education means putting throwing all kids of different abilities and disabilities into one giant classroom, and that's full stop.
That's
That's it.
inclusion. Yeah. Yeah.
So during our training of inclusive, also their ideas of IEPs, aren't very informative. During our training of for inclusive schools and centers, many of our teachers are relieved when we discuss that no, inclusive education does not just mean throwing people of all abilities and disabilities into one classroom. We discuss small group teaching. We give them tools to work with children individually. We offer ideas, about how to, that the idea is that we want the kids to be together as much as possible, but not to the detriment of their educational process, or independent living, whatever
Right.
it is they're working on.
Right, to develop their potential in the best environment possible.
And
Um,
that's how you try to find a combination of teaching methods.
right, and individualized instruction is something we're seeing worldwide is a real demand, and hopefully, we at ED 101 and you at Stepping Stones and Mac will be able to help develop that more. Any final words about Stepping Stones or Mac before we go?
You asked about new projects, so talk a little bit about that. We are developing a vocational training for young adults. Most people in the rural area are unemployed, so finding adults with disabilities, finding employment for people with disabilities is not a goal. But what we want them to do is have skills of their choosing, and if the employment opportunities pick up, then they can have work. In the meantime, they can answer the question, what can we do? And this also helps their self-esteem, as well as many of the skills you learn at a job generalizes to other areas of your life, such as a sense of responsibility, organizational skills, being on time, etc. We're also working on with another local NGO, establishing a computer network system in which communication and education can be relayed via internet. Many adults with disabilities have little interaction with the outside world because they cannot leave their apartment or their house. Another project that have underway is an environmental project. We've primarily worked in 2 districts, or we've evaluated all the identified disabled children in 2 districts in rural Georgia. And so we have this environmental project that we want to start to see if there's these areas had many factories with few pollution safeguards during the Soviet Union. And as a result, there's many heavy metals in the soils and rivers that run through these areas. We want to see if there's a relationship between the high levels of autism in certain areas and these pollutants. It could help in recommendations for pregnant women and about certain foods that they can eat, since some foods absorb more things like lead from the soil. Stepping Stones. We are founded by Stepping Stones International Foundation. It's a nonprofit organization, and they receive donations from private donations. In the future, we'd like to join forces with other organizations doing the same type of work, share information, but also we always need funds.
Yeah, we all do. If someone wanted to find out more about Stepping Stones, where would they do that?
They would go to www.ssnpo.org. That's the website for Stepping Stones. If they wanted to find out more about about MAC in Georgia, the website for that is www.macgeorgia, M-A-C Georgia, all one word, .org.
Well, thank you so much, Cathy, for your time. for joining us. We're so proud of all the work that you've done for decades around the world to help children and help those children with disabilities. We're proud to be to offer and help in any way we can. And thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you, Ted, and I look forward for you to come visit us.
I'm looking forward to come visit you too. Bye bye, Cathy.
Bye.